And that is so incredibly stupid, right? There's way more involved in what people do than one particular thing, one particular ideology that they happen to believe in. So if we're talking about the sort of overall interactions with unbelievers and things that might happen, that thing's not a product of just happening to believe in something. It's a product of more than that. So I would say it's not a product primarily of one factor. It's a product of three factors. So if we think of this in terms of a triangle, one side is belief, right? A Christian could believe in Christianity, a Muslim could believe in Islam, and yet either one of them might get things totally wrong, right? You can believe that Allah is the one God, that Muhammad is his prophet, and still get things totally wrong about Islam and do things that are totally un-Islamic. You can be a Christian, believe Jesus is Lord, who died on the cross for sins and rose from the dead, and still live your life in a way that's completely inconsistent with Jesus. Because there's more to how you live, there's more to how we live than mere belief in a system. So there's another component missing here, and that would be knowledge. A Muslim, and if he's going to truly obey Allah, would have to know what Allah said and what Muhammad said. He would have to know quite a bit of information, because there's a lot in Islam. And likewise, if you are a Christian and you're going to follow Jesus, you would have to know. You would have to know what Jesus said, what his apostles taught, what the core teachings of the gospel are. You'd have to know these kinds of things. If you don't, you can still believe in Jesus, but you're probably going to get a lot of things wrong. And I hear this sort of thing all the time from people who believe in Jesus. And they say, what would Jesus do? You start asking them, they have no clue. They have no clue. And usually what they mean by what would Jesus do is what would I do, and I'm assuming that Jesus would do the same thing. I don't know anything about him, but I like him, and I assume he's just like me. So you would have to know. And finally, you would have to have a certain personality type where you're going to actually obey what it is that you've learned based on the religion that you believe in, right? Because you don't have to. You can believe in Christianity, and you can know Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, and say, I don't know, that's too hard. That's some hard stuff right there. I really can't love my enemies. And likewise, you could believe in Islam and know you could know everything I just said about jihad and say, I don't know, that was for a different time. That was a more violent time. I don't really want to do that sort of thing. The world has changed. The world has changed. I don't want to do that kind of thing. But when you combine those things, right? When you have, and when I'm talking about obedience, I'm talking about a personality. There are certain personalities who will do whatever they believe is right. They will obey whatever moral law they're following to the death. Right? They're always ready to die for what they believe in, and that can be a very good thing. That can be a good thing. If that sort of personality type is attached to very good moral values, you get a Martin Luther King or something, right? You can kill me, I'm still going to march. But if it's attached to certain other things, can be pretty dangerous. Now, so if you combine belief in Allah and Muhammad with knowledge of what Allah and Muhammad say about how you're to interact with unbelievers in certain circumstances, and the personality type is, whether I like it or not, this I'm going to do. I'm going to do what my religion calls for. You get sort of the jihad triangle here. Right? That's when you get a jihadi. That's when you get a terrorist attack. You've combined those things. And so, if you're a terrorist recruiter, if you're an ISIS recruiter, what you're looking for people with certain beliefs, like belief in Islam, and people whose personality is such that they would do whatever Allah commanded them, but who don't know very much, right? Westernized people who don't know much about what Allah has commanded, and then you find these people, you find them online, you say, do you even know what you're doing here? Are you seriously paying taxes to a Western government that is waging war against Islam all over the world, and you're doing this? Have you not thought through this? What is your problem here? Look at what Islam actually commands. And if you convince them on that part, well, the other parts are just in place. So, notice you can have one or two of any of these sides here. If you lack the third side, then you don't get jihad, right? You can know what Islam teaches and have a personality type that you're willing to lay down your life for what you believe, but if you don't believe that Islam's true, well, you don't get a jihad. So that's me. I got two of these sides, right? I got two of these sides. I don't believe that it's true. You can believe that Islam is true and know what Islam teaches as long as you don't have the correct personality type to actually do what it says. Violence is really bad. Or you could believe and have the right personality type, but just not know what it teaches. And again, those are the targets for recruiters. And likewise, if you're a Christian, you might believe in Christianity and might not know what it teaches, and you might have the required personality type. And these are the people that could be easily misled by some evil person into doing some horrible things in the name of Christianity, right? Because you give them some wrong knowledge here. So this isn't there's nothing difficult to understand here, right? And yet you put all of our politicians and all of the media reporters, all of the great educators and professors, roll them up into a ball, and they're totally confused by everything I just said. It doesn't make any sense. Now, I personally think that a 5-year-old can understand this, which means that there's something else at work in people who can't understand it. So, I think we can open it up for Q&A. And if you disagree with me, feel free to say why you think I'm wrong. I'm not made of glass here. Yep.
Great presentation, by the way. When you talked about the different stages, it seems to me, from just observations, I'm not in these towns, but places where we're getting a large influx of Muslims with immigration and things like that, like in Dearborn, some of these places where they get a larger population and start getting in political power and things like that, it seems like the transition is moving through these stages from outside observation. Do you think that that's something that's actually happening too? Or?
Of course. When has it not gone through those stages as a population has increased? I'm saying this as someone who was arrested in Dearborn for holding up a video camera while my friend, who's a former Muslim, was talking to some Muslims who came up to him and started a conversation with him, asking him why he believed in Christianity. So they came up to him, were asking him, hey, how can you believe God came out of a woman? How can you believe that the Bible hasn't been corrupted? Nabil's answering these questions, responding to these questions, and police came up and threw us in jail in the city of Dearborn, Michigan, in the United States of America, on public property, having a conversation. I wasn't even having a conversation. I was standing there with a camera so that no one could say we did something or said something that we didn't actually do. Now, that could happen in other circumstances, right? There are police who have abused their authority in all kinds of areas, but that's specifically related to Nabil sharing the gospel with young Muslims who are coming up and asking questions. And so that sort of thing happens over and over again, right?
So it's like stage 2.
Yeah, and it's sort of leaning in that direction because there's no official Sharia law. Like I hear people say, and they kind of exaggerate, Dearborn, Michigan is completely under Sharia law. No, it's not, right? No, it's not. But things happen to where they try and use the legal system. I'm not talking about just the Muslims here. I'm talking about police who want to be on good terms with the local Muslim population will start enforcing things that they should not be enforcing according to the U.S. Constitution. So just to give another example, a couple of years before that, I went out with a group of Christians. They were telling me they were going to do outreach in the neighborhood around a mosque. And as Muslims were walking home, hand them copies of the Gospel of John in Arabic. And you might think that that's in poor taste, right? They're walking out of the mosque. You might think, hey, that's kind of mean. Well, we're not talking about, whether it's nice or not. Or we're talking about whether that is constitutionally protected activity, which it indisputably is, right? So they invited me along just in case anyone got into an argument about Christianity and Islam and, David, you'd be better at that sort of thing. So we went out there and people are handing out copies of the Gospel of John and tracts and so on. And as soon as we start, keep in mind, we're not on the mosque property. That would be private property, right? You don't have the right to do whatever you want on private property. On public sidewalks and so on, your activity, your speech is protected by the First Amendment. And so we're on the sidewalks around the mosque, so as people are going home, can hand them something. And police show up right after we start. And police officer gathers all of us together. Everyone, come over here. You come here right now. Brings us over. He says, everyone give me your ID cards. Now notice, there's no right to do that, right? It's a legal search and seizure here, right? I mean, according to the Constitution, you have to have what's called probable cause in order to stop someone. Now, courts have since come up with some qualifications for stopping people. You can stop people if you have some sort of suspicion, if you have some sort of reasonable suspicion of activity. It doesn't have to escalate all the way to probable cause. There's a lower bar there to stop someone. What were we doing that would give any suspicion of our activity? We're handing Christians standing here with copies of the Gospel of John. What illegal activity could we be would we be doing that would make a police officer suspicious? None. But he stopped us, took our ID cards, and then wrote down all of our names and addresses. And then, right in front of us, walks over and starts talking to the imam of the mosque for about 10 minutes in Arabic. Right? And then by that time, they talk, tell us to wait where we are, and talk for about 10 minutes until everyone has gone home. Everyone from the mosque has gone home. And he comes back, hands us our ID cards back, and says, all right, you're free to go. Now, think about what just happened right there, right? People are there to hand out materials on a public sidewalk, which, again, whether you think that's a good idea or not, it is constitutionally protected activity. Stopped people from doing what is protected by the Constitution under guise of, hey, I'm a police officer, I need your information, and obviously tried to intimidate us, right? That's pretty intimidating when you got someone taking down your home addresses and stuff like this as you're speaking near a mosque. So that's not like full-blown Sharia, right? They're not, you're handing out a copy of the gospel and we're going to throw you in jail or something like that. But it's not the Constitution here, right? It's veering in another direction, and that's simply going to continue in certain areas. Yeah.
What can we do?
About what?
Following making them follow the Constitution.
Oh, under Sharia, we do what we did. We sued them and won. So, and now they don't do that anymore. I mean, they might do that still, but they're a bit more careful about doing things like that. So, that's what I would do in that situation. Yeah.
Earlier, you had a quote up on the screen that was saying, "Don't let the polytheists near the mosque." Right? I wanted to know, what exactly is going to be considered a polytheist according to Islam? If someone is a Christian, say, and they believe in the Trinity, is that going to be considered polytheist to them, or can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, and that was the purpose of just 2 verses later saying the Jews say Ezra is the son of Allah,
Okay.
and the Christians say that the Messiah is the son of Allah. We're polytheists, right?
Okay.
So we wouldn't either. And just so you know, only Muslims are allowed near the mosque today. Only Muslims are allowed even in the city of Mecca.
That's right, yeah.
Yep.
I saw your YouTube video today going through the 2020 episode on Islam.
Yeah.
And it's shocking to me how, in general, the mainstream media defends Islam but will go the opposite way to criticize Christianity. What do you think is the basis for that huge discrepancy in their behavior?
Well, there are a lot of self-loathing people in the world, right? And it's something like this, right? The United States has done bad things, right? And we're most familiar with them because we live in a country where you're free to self-criticize, right? As a matter of fact, I'll give you the entire rundown right now, right? For the first couple centuries of Christianity, the first couple centuries of the United States of America, people really love this country, right? People really like the country. You can point to things that are wrong, as they did, right? There's a war fought over slavery. People will disagree and fight over certain things. But people, even after all these things, even after various wars and so on, people still love the country. If you are an educator and you're really trying to change some things, right? You have a certain agenda. You want to change a bunch of the things about America. Well, it really helps you if people don't think that America is really good. They think of it as really awful. If people are saying, yeah, America has some problems, but it's really the greatest nation that's ever existed, these aren't the sort of people who are going to go out marching the streets and tearing things down and getting the job done. So if you really want a bunch of people who are going to go out and make all the drastic changes you want in society, you need to raise up a generation that really thinks America is this despicable, awful place. Those are the people who are going to go and just be ready to burn it all down and start over. And so that's what you have. A lot of people who are educated by professors who teach this, then go on to become politicians, go on to become reporters, and those aren't the sort of people who will accept anything else. Once they become heads of corporations, heads of media corporations, and so on, those aren't the sort of people who will even allow you to say, I think America's not all that bad, right? Oh, get out of here, you right-wing nut. Go back to your KKK meeting, right? So then you start weeding out everyone who doesn't agree with the way and then you get the situation that we're in today. And so anything that has to do with us, that's going to be bad, and anything that's exotic that's somewhere else, well, that's all wonderful. And so that's how I would account for that. Yeah, like that.
Seems like, thank you very much. It seems like the abrogation and the chronology are essential to a good understanding of Islam. Are those accepted principles within the Muslim community, among scholars, both abrogation and chronology? And is there something that I could point a Muslim to if they question everything that you said?
Yeah, it is. For centuries of Islam, in other words, if you go to the early Muslim sources, if you go to the main hadith collections, they talk about abrogation all the time. This verse abrogated that verse, this verse abrogated that verse. So that's taken for granted, as it is with the most respected Muslim commentators of all time. And we look at the historical background from the verse on abrogation. The historical background was the unbelievers started making fun of Muslims for believing in a prophet whose revelations kept changing. And so they're making fun of him, and Surah 2, verse 106, came down as a response to that. What do you mean? Allah's all-powerful, right? So Allah has power over all things? So doesn't he have the power to change his revelations? Of course he does. He's all-powerful, right? So that's a response to that. So classical Islam, there's no dispute about abrogation. But in modern, contemporary Islam, yes, there is some dispute. And now, if I read that verse to a Muslim, he will say, no, this is talking about abrogating earlier scriptures. It's talking about abrogating the Torah and the Bible. Now, that doesn't even make sense because, according to the Quran, the Torah and the Gospel haven't been abrogated. That's chapter 2. In a later revelation, Surah 5, some Jews come to Muhammad to settle a dispute. It's chapter 5, verse 43. Some Jews come to Muhammad to settle a dispute. And Allah's response is, why are they coming to you when they have the Torah? So according to Allah, Jews don't need Muhammad, they need to obey the Torah. Well, that would make no sense if the Quran abrogated those scriptures. Just a few verses later, chapter 5, verse 47, Allah says, let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah hath revealed therein. So Christians are supposed to judge by the gospel. It makes no sense if the gospel has been abrogated. So for Muslims today who say, no, that refers to earlier scriptures, I would just take them to a bunch of passages from the hadiths, and you can just go to a hadith search engine and type in the word abrogates, and a bunch of passages where that word is used to talk about revelations will pop up. You can go to altafsir.com and go to chapter 2, verse 106. and look at the commentaries on it, and they agree with what I've said. So yes, you may have to clarify that for people who don't understand how abrogation works. But what I'm saying is the classic traditional Muslim position that goes back to Muhammad and his companions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Either one.
So I looked at that triangle at first, and I see belief, knowledge, and obedience. And I say to myself, as a Christian, we take jihad off of that. If I believe Christ is the Son of God, and I have the knowledge of the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, and I'm obedient to that, doesn't this problem solve itself? We're all Christians, and we go out and do that.
Yep. Yeah, and I would say, as a Christian, I want to avoid bloodbaths, right?
Amen.
I believe that given what Muhammad said, and given a world of fallen, sinful human beings, right? Because Muslims aren't the only fallen, sinful human beings. All of us are fallen, sinful human beings. We're all created in the image of God, and we've all been marred by sin. But Muslims have been taught this. Many of them don't follow it. Many of them don't know about it. Many of them, even if you tell them about it, aren't going to follow it. If they could get taken by an ISIS jihadi and told you have to go out and fight, and there are Muslims who won't do it. But on the whole, there are always going to be people with the correct personality type and the correct belief and the knowledge, and so you're always going to get jihad and jihadi groups springing up in the world of Islam, right? Now, on outside the Muslim world, you've got a bunch of people who are also fallen, sinful human beings. And they understand that there are constant attacks coming from jihadi groups. And you have to wonder if your kid is safe walking across a bridge when it's so common now to drive a truck through them and so on. Very easy to launch a terrorist attack now. Given that human beings are fallen and sinful, it's very, very easy to say, I want someone to deal with this problem, and I don't care how he does it. I don't care how he does it. And I will vote him into power as long as he's going to deal with that terrorism problem once and for all. And I'm saying this because, we're only a few decades after global bloodbaths. Emerging from some of the most... Germany was one of the most civilized places on the planet. They were the ones who were producing all of the greatest composers and music. They were the ones who had all of the most brilliant physicists and scientists. They were cutting edge of everything. Hey, now's a good time for Hitler, right? All of the stuff they were doing actually worked better for them to think, we are the master race here. We're the ones producing everything. Fit right in, right? Epic bloodbath. And it's not just him. Stalin killed millions of his own people. We're not talking about 1,000 years ago. We're talking about a few decades ago. China actually has the biggest mass murders in history, with Mao and others. It's killing millions. Think about this. It's every part of the world, right? Europe, epic bloodbaths. Russia, epic bloodbaths. China, it's everywhere. It seems that human beings in general are capable of some awful, awful, horrible things. I'm saying that because we really think, we've moved past all that. No, you don't. You might not want to do that right now, but I'm saying if you get enough people who are desperate enough and afraid enough, they are capable of anything that anyone in previous generations have done. And so, if you have a world of people like that who are getting more and more fearful, and jihadis who are getting more and more emboldened, that is a recipe for a global bloodbath at some point. I, as a Christian, would like to avoid that global bloodbath, right? Want to do whatever we can to stop that sort of thing. And fortunately, I believe that Islam is much weaker than people think, as an ideology. There's a reason they kill you in the Muslim world for criticizing Islam. There's a reason they do that. There's a reason they will lock you up. In Saudi Arabia, remember, like a blogger will post something, and they'll lock him up and give him lashes for posting something on a blog. There's a reason they do not want to deal with criticism, and the reason is it can't stand up to criticism. For an individual Muslim, or even a group of Muslims, they might be able to hear all kinds of criticism and not leave Islam. But as a whole, once basic information starts becoming common knowledge, you start saying, oh, he left Islam, he left Islam, he left Islam, he left Islam, he left Islam. So if I'm looking to the future thinking, this could get really ugly very quickly, a few years down the road, I want to avoid that sort of thing at all costs. And if I think, well, the real cost is everyone learning some basic information about Islam and Muhammad, learning to defend their beliefs, learning to respond to Muslim arguments, and certain facts about Muhammad becoming common knowledge, I think it's problem solved. You'll still have Muslims, you'll still have jihadis, but the problem will be diminishing and not expanding. Right? And I'm saying that because I've just seen too many Muslims send me messages through email, on YouTube, saying, hey, I was watching your videos, I hated you at first, but I kept watching to try and refute you, and just so you know, I've left Islam. And some of them become atheists, some of them become Christians, some of them, all kinds of things. But what am I doing? I'm just telling them stuff that their leaders never tell them. And so if I'm just one guy sitting in my room in front of my bookshelf recording videos, and so many people can leave Islam, what happens when these things become common knowledge? See, as things stand now in the world, as we pointed out, Islam is portrayed very positively by the media and politicians and so on, and people have noticed over and over again, there's a spike in conversions after major terrorist attacks. There's a spike in conversions to Islam after major terrorist attacks. How in the world does that make sense? You would expect people to leave Islam after the major terrorist attacks, right? Well, what happens after every major terrorist attack? Right after the terrorist attack, we get 50 different Muslim preachers to come on TV and explain how wonderful Islam is. Right? And you get, oh, wow, I didn't know all this awesome information about Islam. And people convert. People convert to Islam based on all this wonderful information that they've heard. Those things that are said, they only work in an atmosphere of ignorance. And the West is one massive atmosphere of ignorance when it comes to Islam.
Of ourselves.
That's right.
And this atmosphere of ignorance allows a Muslim preacher, or even a non-Muslim person who's talking about Islam, to say whatever he or she wants about the religion. And no one's in a position to correct it. So, a person can come in and say, you believe in women's rights? Muhammad was a champion of women's rights. Islam's a religion for you if you believe in women's rights. He can say that. If no one knows, you think, oh, what a great thing. And some of the people won't convert. They'll say, maybe I should look into this. But lots of people will convert. And so we see this over and over again. Now imagine a world where a preacher shows up and says, hey, you believe in women's rights? Muhammad was a champion of women's rights, and 10 hands go up. I got some problems with that. Let me pull out the Quran right now, and here's where you're wrong. That would be a different kind of world, right? So, and let me put it this way. I've met lots of converts to Islam. I've met tons of people who have converted to Islam. Every time I go do a debate somewhere or something like that, people come up to me afterwards, hey, I converted to Islam, and they tell me a little bit about their story. I have never, ever in my life met one person who converted to Islam after doing anything I would regard as a careful study of Islam. Every person who tells me, hey, I converted to Islam, I say, oh, really? Why'd you convert to Islam? And if it's a woman, I get a story like this. Well, I was walking around in my miniskirt, guys were hooting and hollering at me, and my Muslim friend told me, join a religion that really respects women's rights. And, oh, so I converted. Really? What do you do with this passage of the Quran? What? I never heard of it. If it's a guy, hey, I was a Christian, I grew up in the church, and I asked my pastor to explain the Trinity to me. He couldn't. I went to my Muslim friend, he told me, this is a religion of pure monotheism, we get away from all that, so I converted. Really? Didn't bother to dig any deeper there, right? No deeper. And so, this sort of method of winning converts only works if people just don't know what they're talking about when it comes to Islam. So, the solution would be person to person, right? Speaking in front of groups, getting information out there however you can, Facebook, YouTube, blogs, Twitter, getting information out there. If every person who who knows anything shares that with one other person, now you've just doubled the number of people who know something. And I think if you have an informed population of free people, just one informed population of free people, I don't think you have to worry about jihad very much anymore.